So really the topic of today is to find out how biased you are or not. So just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Haena. I'm the founder and the lead behavior scientist of the Bias Lab. So I started this company, which is a consulting agency focused on behavior science, because through my life experience, and fortunately, I had the privilege of living and working in a few different countries, I witnessed firsthand how much structural inequalities there are, and they're really limiting the growth of our society as a whole. So I wanted to, share and use my knowledge of behavior science and what I've learned to drive the behavior change for social good. So the Bias Lab is a consulting firm which provides tailored solutions using behavior science, agile design, and data analytics. And really our vision and mission is to work with organizations so they themselves become change makers in driving this behavior change for social good. So these are just my company website and LinkedIn. If you scan the QR code, it will link to my company's LinkedIn page in case you want to find out more about it, or we also have a lot of articles, interesting articles and event details about behavior science and unconscious bias, for example. So without much further ado, we'll kickstart. So just to let you know, I hope we will, we have an intimate group of people. So I hope we will make this more of like an interactive session. So instead of me just talking for the entire 1 hour, it would be nice to also hear your thoughts and what you think, or if any questions that you have. So it's more of a two-way interaction. So first, I want us to do a quick visualization exercise. So if you could just close your eyes or be in comfortable space and really listen to what I'm saying and visualize the story or the scenario that I'm about to tell you. So you just woke up and you realize that you kind of snoozed through first 3 alarms, and now you are late for your flight. You have to get to the airport in 2 hours. So you start having panic attack, and then you start to really regret the fact that you didn't pack last night. You say you were going to, but then you're like, oh, I'm gonna have plenty of time the morning of your flight that I can pack quickly and I'm sure everything will be okay. But then again, you realize that your alarm snoozed off and you're running late. So you quickly just throw stuff in your bag, you jump in shower, and then you get out and then you call for a taxi. Then this taxi driver arrives and then you tell him, hey, can you please hurry up? I need to get to the airport. So the taxi driver aggressively drives to the airport. And then when you get to the airport, you're like, just imagine your flight is about to depart in 1 hour. So you're like, oh my God, I can't miss this flight. I have important meetings. So then you start stressing out. Then you feel a little bit lost at the airport. So you decided, okay, well, since it's like there's a whole flock of people in that corner, so let me just go there and find out what's going on. So you start walking over there, and fortunately, things worked out well, and you managed to get on the flight last minute. So you sigh and you take a deep breath. Then you are seated at your seat on the airplane, and you took out a newspaper, and you start just kind of breezing through what's there. And then there were two articles on the front cover. So one talked about, of course, how COVID-19 cases are rising again, and more number of people are being hospitalized, and so on. And also there was another article that talked about, how vaccination, how much risk it carries, that side effects are very serious, and it could cause you more harm than benefit. So, thinking to yourself, in this scenario, you are an anti-vaxxer, you do not believe in vaccines. So you're like, oh, well, see, look at this article that talks about the dangerous side effects of the vaccine. I was right. Good thing that I didn't get the vaccine, and this confirms my view. So that's the end of the scenario. That's the end of the story. Could anyone be maybe willing to tell me, like, if there are any unconscious biases that you've spot in this scenario, or any interesting observations that you made? You could unmute and tell me, or you can, if you prefer, you can type in the chat. There's no right or wrong answer, so just don't be shy. Someone? Okay, I see someone typed. The placement of the article. Thank you, Rachana. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Okay, that's interesting. Anyone else? Any thoughts? Again, like, there's no right or wrong, so feel free to just share what you think. Okay.
I walked in when you were midway through the story, and one thing that struck out to me was how something kept right in front of you is something that you're going to buy into. That was just a thing that came in my mind. That's all. So the placement, the fact that the article was right at the top, so you're going to immediately reach out to that and maybe buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna touch on that, what you just mentioned, and thanks for bringing that up. And we're gonna touch on that later in this presentation. So thanks again. And also Gina mentioned, yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, that's a good one. I will also cover that in a bit. But yeah, you both of you are absolutely right. Okay, so thanks, Anjana, for prompting people to speak up. But if you feel comfortable, please, this is an interactive session, so just speak up. But if you don't, then no worries at all. You can also just type in chat, or yeah. So yeah, so thanks again for sharing your thoughts. But basically, Gina and Rachana, we'll touch on what you've just mentioned, but also if you listen to the scenario, basically in this story, there were several unconscious biases that perhaps you've overlooked. Well, that a lot of people overlooked because, well, they're unconscious, right? So to start, well, when you woke up, and then remember I said that instead of packing the night before, I was thinking, oh, you know what? I'm gonna have plenty of time the morning of the flight, and I'm gonna wake up early, have amazing breakfast, shower, pack, and arrive at the airport on time. So that's a classic overconfidence bias. Like, you think you overestimate what you could do. And after that, you say, you're gonna call a taxi, and that the taxi driver drove aggressively to the airport. How many of you in your visualization picture this taxi driver as a man instead of a woman? Including myself, I think most people would imagine a man, because generally speaking, taxi drivers are mostly men. And also I use the word aggressive, drove aggressively, which tends to connotate with, with a male masculinity. So that's a stereotypal representative bias that we see. And then when we got in the story, when I got to the airport, I was panicking, I was stressed, and then I just saw a group of people, and then I went there. And that's a in-group bias, or that's a herd mentality, where we tend to, even if we'd like to think that we make decisions based on our own logics and what I think personally, a lot of the times you tend to follow what other people are doing. So this is one example. And the last one, which is, finally you got on the board, and then you realize you read the newspaper, and then there were two articles, and then the one that stood out for you is the one about the vaccine. So Rachana mentioned about the position of the articles, and that's absolutely right. It's related to the saliency of the articles, where, of course, what you see first is something that's going to stick to you more, and if it's bigger headlines. And we're going to touch on this in a bit in more detail. And what Gina mentioned about self-fulfilling prophecy is basically, what it means is that you tend to think that other people are more biased, or that other people make that you take what you're doing well for because you think you are smart or better than others. But when it comes to your own, if you make mistakes, then you tend to blame it on others. So we all do this. Okay. And the other part that I wanted to mention is confirmation bias. The confirmation bias is, again, you tend to stick to information that confirms a view that you already have. And because you're an anti-vaxxer, like I mentioned in this story, in the hypothetical story, that I'm an anti-vaxxer. And when I saw an article, one was about more pro-vaccine and the other one was about more anti-vaccine, I would tend to remember the article that confirms with my view, and hence confirmation bias. So the next slide. Oh, if everyone could mute, please, that would be great. So could everyone have a quick look at this slide? And could anyone tell me if you read exactly according to what's written here, or if anyone didn't? You can, I think there's a feature, if you don't want to unmute, there's a feature where you can raise your hand on Zoom. Oh, yeah, okay, I see some thumbs up. So I can guarantee you that like 99% of the world's population would have followed the same logic. And it's called visual hierarchy. So again, this is kind of, also what Rachana was referring to earlier about the position of articles. So that's one aspect of visual hierarchy. So obviously it's something like this is used a lot in marketing or advertising, where they use, they tap on, leverage unconscious bias to draw attention of customers or users to certain areas of their product or pamphlets or posters, whatever it may be. And again, I've shown this to numerous people, and most of them would would read according to this, the order you mentioned. Okay. So there's a quick exercise to start thinking, start getting you in the zone of unconscious bias. And for the rest of today's session, what I'll be talking about is firstly, the system 1 and system 2, the thinking systems of our brain. Secondly, the implicit biases and heuristics. Thirdly, judgments and decision making, and lastly, solutions. And there will be just a quick exercise at the end to revise what we've learned and covered today. So firstly, two systems. Before we get into the distinction of two systems, I just want to briefly mention that behavior science, or what we are about to cover today, where unconscious bias training falls under, is essentially a cross-section between descriptive behavior and normative behavior. So descriptive behavior is, what people actually do, like how they actually behave in the real world. Whereas normative behavior is how they should be behaving, So for example, a classic example is eating healthy. I tell myself, I should be eating healthy because it's good for your health, and there's really no other reason why you should not. So most people agree and understand why eating healthy is good. So it's normative behavior. Descriptive behaviors, I tell myself I'm going to eat healthy every day, and a lot of times I end up eating junk food or not really eating healthy. That's the actual behavior that I carry out. And what it says is, the traditional economics where they say people make rational choices, that's not really true. And that's how behavior economics really kind of started out, the foundation of behavior economics, that people are irrational. They do not make rational choices. Anyways, not all the time. If I were to be rational, I would always choose to eat healthy, but I don't. So behavior science is really, or behavior economics is the prescriptive way of helping people or nudging people, as the more commercially used term, to behave in a way that's good for themselves and good for the society. So I understand that, I believe that some of you have already covered the system 1 and system 2. So I will just briefly breeze through this. So really system one is in our brain or in our thinking system, there are two modes. So there's system one and system two. And these terms became famous after Daniel Kahneman, who won Nobel laureate based on his research on what's become the, really the popular foundation of behavior science, is that system two is let's start with system two first. So system two is what we think we do, our rational self, our conscious self. This is when we think analytically, we think things through step by step. It's very deliberate, but also it's a bit slower, and it takes a lot more cognitive effort on our end. So what happens is, for example, if you want to decide, should I invest and buy an apartment or not? This is not something that you're gonna decide on a whim or unconsciously. It's something that you will think through very carefully. The problem is when you're under stress, when there are a lot of things happening, that doesn't always happen, right? Like it's like a driving. When you drive, do you really consciously and analytically think through what's going on the road, every person, whatever is out there, strict traffic light or whatever, it becomes a bit more unconscious. And this is kind of like our system one, which is, it's a lot more automatic. It's unconscious. Sometimes we do things or we make decisions unwittingly, unconsciously, and it's faster and it puts a lot less cognitive effort on our brain. And what people get wrong is people tend to think, I'm a very analytical person. Like, of course, like I'm always using my system too. But that's really entirely not true. Like, because what makes us human is, there's a survival instinct in us where the way our brain is formed has a lot of this shortcuts, which I'll go into more detail in a bit, which help us to unload some of our cognitive effort. Because throughout the day, at every moment, we are bombarded with information, and we have so many choices and decisions that we need to make. And our brain just simply can't use system two for all of them. Right. So next we'll cover implicit biases and heuristics. So first, there is an error and then there's a bias, and these two are different. The main difference is, I hope this visual explains what the message I'm trying to convey. But the error is random, It could, as you can see, like I'm trying to shoot at the target, but like I keep missing, like it goes up, it goes to the side, it goes bottom. So it's just a random error. And that is not bias. Why? Because bias is systematic, meaning it's structured, it's systematic, it always miss the target by same magnitude or by same direction. So in real life example, for example, could be, why is it that, in gender equality, why is it that women consistently get lower wage than men? Or in case of race, especially, lately in the US, it's become a big issue. Why is it that police officers always target Black men more than others? So these are systematic, right? The Black men are always profiled to be more dangerous, and that is a bias. It's not an error. So heuristics, in case some of you may not have heard of it, but really what they mean is they are these shortcuts that our brains take, like I mentioned earlier, because our brains have so many, like, if I remember correctly, it's like millions of pieces of information that we receive in a day. And within that, our brain would kind of filter them down to about 50 information that we filter like consciously and think about it consciously. And if you think about over lifetime, how many from what should I eat for breakfast, or to what should I do tomorrow, to what should I change my job? All these are decisions that we need to think through. So what heuristics or shortcuts do is kind of giving brain or our thinking system that shortcut, the rule of thumb, bit of break to help us make a decision quickly and more easily. And the thing is, it's not always perfect. It's a bit of like 80-20 thing. but it's good enough. And sometimes heuristics aren't always bad. Like biases aren't always bad. It just biases are more innate, our innate nature, what makes us human. It's something that's systematic within us. And heuristics, for example, if you like earlier example about the post-service visual hierarchy, when there's something bold and big, our eyes go immediately drawn to that, right? Because if you see a red light, you stop. Like you don't really think, if someone screams, your attention would be drawn to that. Or there's so many examples, but these are all like shortcuts that enable us to make decisions without having to think too much. So how do they relate it to bias? So how is heuristic related to the so-called implicit biases? So biases are really the resulting gap between the normative behavior, which we discussed earlier, which is how people should behave, and heuristically determined behavior, meaning what we actually end up doing. Like eating healthy example, like I should be eating healthy, but I don't. So it's really that gap in between that's called implicit bias. And here you see a list of implicit biases, and I just want to highlight that this is just a very small part of the overall biases. There are so many more, but just to give you some ideas of some of the more well-known or popular ones. So one is, I will not cover each one in detail here. You can easily find more information by Googling, and because I don't want to go through each one of them because of the lack of time, but essentially, like anchoring, for example, is when I tell you, hey, I am looking to buy something that costs around $300, let's say. And then I say, oh, like, do you know what I should buy? Like, I want to buy this dress, and it's about $300. You would immediately start thinking, or most people would, about dresses that cost like, $250 or like $350. But it's unlikely that you will think about dresses that cost $50. Why? Because I've anchored you at $300. So most human brains will immediately start thinking from that point, maybe plus minus, a little bit cheaper, a little bit more expensive, but you will not go to $10 or $1,000. That's one. Loss aversion is another classic bias, which is actually very, very important in behavior science. That loss aversion is everyone, like this, all humans have tendency to feel pain more than the gain. So people tend to want to avoid loss rather than take the risk to sought after potential benefits. And this relates to status quo, right? Status quo is, like, let's continue how things are, because in case we try something new and it doesn't work out, we might experience loss. People don't think about all the potential benefits that you could gain from by taking a different approach. People tend to think more about, what's the loss that we'll be experiencing. Another fun one is gambler's fallacy. It's basically saying you think individual events are related when it's actually not. So let's say I went to a casino and I decided to play a throwing dice game. And I already played like 5 rounds. And for every 5 rounds, I've lost. So I think to myself, you know what? What are the odds that like I'm going to lose 6 rows, like 6 times in a row? So I'm sure the 6th time that I throw my dice, I'm going to win. That's a gambler's fallacy. Why? Because that makes statistically, if you think this through, that makes no sense. Of course, if they are individual events, so just because I lost 5 times or 10 times or 100 times doesn't mean I'm not going to lose the next time. So judgment and decision making. You might wonder, aren't the judgments and decisions the same thing? Well, I can tell you they are not. So let's start with decisions. So decision is, well, unequivocally, you know that it's a decision that we have to make each and every day. There's so many different decisions that we make, which is, as written here, irrevocable allocation of resources. So it's a kind of a decision that you make where you have thought things through, and essentially you might have a bit of an opportunity cost because of the decision that you've made. But all these technicalities aside, it's a decision that you already know, that you're thinking about, whatever decision it is that you're making each and every day. Now, what is judgment? So judgment is essentially what feed into making a decision. So this could be assumptions, wish lists, your preferences, and so on. So to make this example more clear, I'll give an example. Let's say I need to make a decision on, and this is a real example, because until recently I was living in Singapore and I moved to Europe. And my decision was, should I move to Europe or not? And that's a big decision, right? And while I was processing this decision, I had made several judgments, which is a kind of ingredients that go into making a decision. So what are some of these judgments? I said, okay, you know what? I really like European architects, the beautiful buildings. So that's my preference. And then I also said, like because at the time when I left, Singapore was very, very strict during COVID time. Then I was like, I don't really agree with how they are, a little bit being too much encroaching into my personal privacy. That's not really, I don't agree with that value. So that's my judgment on the value. The third one is like, I think when I move to Europe, I'm gonna be more relaxed. I'm gonna be traveling around so much because you can drive. I'm gonna ski. I'm gonna do this. So many things, like a lot of assumptions that I've been making. And so it's important to realize this judgment that you're making within, whether it's assumptions or whatever it may be, because your biases influence your judgment, which essentially influence your decisions. Okay, I'm just gonna pause there for a second. And is everyone clear? Does anyone have a question up to this point? Okay, I'm gonna assume that, okay, great. Okay, I'm gonna assume everyone's clear. So now I want you to take a moment to think about an important decision that you had to make. So nothing like, what should I eat for lunch later, or dinner later in your situation, but something a little bit more strategic or important, like the example that I just shared. And also think about what are the judgments that go into this decision. So it could be a past decision that you've already made, and you kind of think back on what are some of the judgments that you've made, or it could be a decision that you need to make at present, and just thinking through what are some of the judgments that you're making right now. So Arifin, I hope I'm again pronouncing your name correctly. You say you made one recently. Would you like to share?
Yes, thank you. So I recently made a decision about purchasing a flat for myself. I have been looking for it for a long period of time, but I had to make some of the judgment before coming to a concrete decision. So that is what I wanted to share, that the judgment that I actually made, or my family made, is not to buy a flat or the houses to live on, but to look for the premises, look for the environment of the particular building, particular apartment. So this way we had some of the options, and we look for a better one, and finally we selected one which has got some premises. There are open space surrounding the building, and there is plenty of area for physical exercises. That led us to take a decision. So but I would like to say that yes, there are some points for judgments, and based on that points, I came up to a decision. Thank you.
Right, great. Thanks for sharing that example. And if you don't mind, could you elaborate a little bit more on on the judgments? I know you've shared one or two, but it would be nice to, if you go back to, let me go back to this list. Sorry. So if you look at this, list under judgments box, and using that as a guide to kind of refresh your memory on what are some of the judgments that you've made that went into your decision?
Well, definitely, one of them was included as the price. I'm not sure if it is, matching with the values, but definitely it is a material. So that is the price, coming to my mind. But definitely we had to, make a better judgment, looking at the prices or the values maybe. And then definitely option, as I talk with you, that option we need to say that my need versus availability, and also matching with the money that I have to put. And then risks and uncertainties. Of course, I am talking about the risks, meaning to say that even if I am going to take this apartment here in this place, this is very crowded. There is no area for parking, and I have to directly come down and also get to my apartment. There is no space to stand and stare, something like this. These are the risks and also the uncertainties in the future, looking at my friends are going to come to meet me when I'm retired. So how come they are going to park this, their transports over there, their cars over there? And of course, preferences. Preferences mean to say, I must say that the area, the location of the building, that is something. And assumption is, yes, I told that assumption is that the place that I have booked for, that I took the decision, is going to be comfortable for me, because I will have that area, I have that open space to go for exercises, to have some physical exercises over there. That will make me happy as well. So these are the assumptions.
Great, thank you. Really appreciate you sharing your story. And if you could think about, yeah, excited. We're all excited for your new space. Sounds amazing. So in the judgments that you shared, Arkin and everyone, to your own examples, can you spot some of the biases that went into your judgment? And if anyone, Arkin or others, willing to share, that would be great.
Oh yes, one of the biases, I must say, the price. The final decided one has got a little bit lower end compared to the current marketplace. And another bias was that I was in a position to negotiate for the price with the vendor. So these are the biases contributed to take the decision.
Thank you. Great. Anyone else who would like to share? And it could be about personal decisions or professional, like work-related decisions that you had to make within work setting. So any example is great.
I can share an example. Yeah, this is a professional decision. So sometime back, I had to work on a project with a couple of clients, and it was a very tight timeline, and the deliverable timeline was too short. So when I had to decide whom I would hire to work with me, I'm not sure what this would come under. I'm assuming it's I don't know what kind of a bias this would be, but my immediate reaction was to the hiring that I did was based on convenience. Who is it that I'm most comfortable speaking to? Who is it that is the most closest to me? And who is it that I can easily speak to and get the work done in the stipulated time? So I know that it worked for that project, but it need not necessarily have, it didn't have to be that way. It could have been more open-ended, and I didn't have to take that approach. But there were certain circumstances that led me to take such a decision. So that is one of it. Not for Noora, Seema. You don't have to worry about it. Not for Noora. It was for another thing sometime back. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What you specify this because you say you're not sure what bias it's called. And again, you and Arthur both did a great job detecting, the biases that are underlying in your judgments. And thanks again for sharing. So Rachana, when you shared, I love that example because it's called in-group bias. So what it does is basically like most people out there including me, you tend to unconsciously, again, this is important. Like, yes, now thinking back, you're like, oh, I wonder if that was the right thing to do or the best thing to do. But at the time when there are a lot of things going on, or when there's time pressure or whatever reason maybe, whatever reason may be, this unconscious bias called in-group bias makes us tend to prefer people who are in our group. And again, this in-group distinction can vary by individual and by society and by the context in which you're exposed to. But let's say, for example, it's another woman or another person from your city, someone from your same university, or someone who looks like you, someone who has the same name as you, even things like someone who shares your birthday. So any kind of indication that hints at, oh, like we're similar or we are alike, we are like in the same group, that gives that's an unconscious bias again, and that gives you comfort, and that people have tendency to prefer other people or support decisions of others who are in the same group. So thank you for sharing, and I will, and to others who's on this call, even if you didn't share, also in your own time, think about what we just discussed between decision, judgment, and the biases that are underlying in your judgment. Okay, so lastly, so knowing all this, like, what can we actually do about it? So not all hopes are lost. It is virtually impossible to remove all the biases at all times. It is just not possible. But sometimes we do have solutions for certain situations that at least improve our decision making and our behavior. So first, there's two solutions or two umbrella of solutions. The first one is called debiasing. And remember the early example with the target and then kind of the shoot marks. So let's say this is the target, right? And the arm is where I've shot. And remember, bias is systematic, so all your missed marks go into one direction. So one way of fixing the unconscious bias is by fixing the arm, meaning, you try your best to shoot closer to the actual target instead of missing it. So some of the examples, and again, this applies to your personal encounters as well as at workspace. I have a question from Anjana. What if everyone in a group has a similar bias? How can we assess? Okay, great question. So that's why diversity and inclusion is so important, because what happens is in many situations that you tend to hire people who are like you. We tend to prefer and listen to people who are like us. Just what happens. And when you have that, when there is when that happens, firstly, there's herd mentality that hinders making even better decisions. As in, if let's say 5 out of 6 people start to say, let's have chicken for lunch. I mean, this is obviously a silly example, but then it's likely that the last person say, oh yeah, okay, let's go along with that. Workspace, if someone say 5 out of 6 people say, you know what, I think for this project, it makes sense for us to budget $2 million without really thinking deeply through. And that the last person, the 6th person, was thinking, you know what, I think that we are over budgeting this. But it's likely that this person would go with the herd mentality, go with what the majority is saying and just go with the flow. And what does that lead to? Bad decisions. That's going to cost a lot of money to the company or to the organization. So this is something that one way is by fixing the arm, right? And using the debiasing technique. So what are some of the treatments they can do? Well, firstly is someone plays the devil's advocate. And it's better to have someone from outside, whether it's outside organization, outside the team, whoever it may be, who can be as objective as possible. Because when you're in that group, it's really, really it's very difficult, even knowing what in-group bias or herd mentality is, to think unlikely, right? Because you may not even be aware in that moment that that your decision is being influenced by what other people are saying simply. Okay. The second one is actually one of my favorites, which is called pre-mortem. So what that means is you pretend, like let's say you have an important project decision to make, which is hiring a new manager for the project A, okay? And or starting a group, forming a project group for this new project A. And what pre-mortem does is basically you tell people who are involved in this project, okay, and this is a very important project. Let's say, okay, let's pretend this is 1 year after this project has initiated. Let's pretend that the project has failed. It was chaotic, like it just failed so miserably. Now let's think about what are the potential reasons that caused this failure. And what this does is it shifts your frame of mind, and it helps you to think about what are the potential problems that went wrong that caused the chaos. And it helps to think about, hence pre-mortem, before you actually start the project, what could be prevented. Okay? The third one is checklist. I think this is relatively self-explanatory. And also incentive. Incentive it doesn't necessarily mean financial incentive. It can be other forms of incentives within workspace. Maybe it's a benefit. Or it could be like motivational incentive, like promotion. And also it could be disincentive, just like the other way around, where it's more of a, if you don't do certain thing, you will miss out on something, or that you will be punished or fined. The last two is, one is promote debate and kind of, sharing ideas. And in order for this to happen, it's important to have the psychological safety net. The last one is, be aware of biases, like this training. So just simply at least being aware of how you make your decisions, what are the biases that could potentially influence your judgment. Yes, it's not gonna solve 100% of and remove 100% of your unconscious biases, but it will put you in a better place to at least aim closer to the target than before. The next one is called nudging. Has anyone heard of the term nudges before?
I had a question.
Yes, sorry, who is this?
This is Seema. I'm sorry, maybe because of
no worries.
the internet. I just wanted to understand, are there instances where bias is actually good? Bias also comes from all your the pre-learning that happens based on, So it's the sum effect of some of the learnings and experiences that you've had, which may be protective. I'm thinking, are there instances where?
Yeah. Seema, your question couldn't have been more timely because what I'm about to tell you, which is the solution to called, it's widely known as nudging, but basically what it does is it's using or leveraging on biases, unconscious biases, to help people make better decisions. So Seema, a quick answer to your question, and we'll go into more depth in a minute. But yes, absolutely, there are cases where sometimes biases work well. Let's say when you're in a danger, your unconscious bias is precisely what's going to save your life, right? You detect something fishy or something dangerous, you hear some noises, you smell something funny, your instinct tells you to avoid it or to make a run for it. So that's also unconscious bias, and that's gonna save your life in this extreme example. But also what we're about to talk about in nudging is how do we actually use, knowing unconscious biases is so innate in us. It's what makes us a human, really. It's that our thinking system, how our brains have evolved over the generations, and what makes us human, and how we use that to make better decisions for ourselves and for the society. So here, unlike the previous one, which is debiasing, moving the arm, this one is moving the target. So it's designing, in behavioral science, it's designing the environment or products or services in such a way that helps, that nudges. It's not a shove, it's nothing is forced upon anyone. It's just a nudge to help people make better decisions. So, for example, Again, and the term nudge is coined by Taylor and Fosstein, who are Nobel laureate prize winners. They are economists, famous behavior economists who use the term nudge. And nudge it doesn't represent all of the techniques used to move the target, but it's just kind of a term that's become very popularly used to refer to some of these techniques where you leverage an unconscious bias to influence decisions. So few examples is, okay, again, incentive is one of them, and default is another one. So, and I will go into a detailed example in a bit. And give feedback is another one, and as well as structuring the way you present choices, right? Like the complexity of choices. And what they need to entail is, firstly, it needs to be easy, this nudging, whatever nudging it is that you're using. It must be timely, attractive, and social. So an example. All right. Okay. So these are some of real life nudging examples that are actually implemented in real life. So let's just look at the first one, which is, the trash can. So you know how people have always said they will recycle, and they don't. And you can obviously try to devise some techniques, but also in this case, especially when you're trying to change the behavior of mass, like a public in this sense, it's sometimes really helpful to use cost-effective nudges, such as this one. So what it simply did was it divided into 3 cans. So it made it very, very easy for people, right? Like you don't have to sort out like what goes where, and it's color-coded, and it's got those visuals on top that literally like show you what needs to go in there and what can't. And it's bold, it's bright, it's big, it really stands out, so you cannot miss it. So this is one really great example of how nudging technique was used to change the behavior of people, and tapping on that unconscious bias of, well, saliency is one of them, where visual is used to stand out, make something stand out. Okay, and also it uses a bit of a choice architecture. So choice architecture is a technique or a solution that's used to make choices easier for people. So here, whenever you know how when you grow up, teachers or whoever used to say, oh, like don't expect me to spoon feed you because you should learn it yourself. But when it comes to nudging, like you need to make it as easy as possible for people. Like you need to literally spoon feed people as much as you possibly can, because if you make it physically and mentally easier for them to do this, they will without thinking just put the plastic bottles in the blue one and food waste in the black one, right? They don't need, their brains don't need to think. It's simply they're presented in front of them. The next example is, and I really love this example, where it's the one with the pink box. Basically, a lot of the men's public toilets had an issue where men were kind of peeing outside where they should be, like peeing all over. And, it's gross, it's not hygienic, it's not good for the health or for anyone really. So instead of, they start telling people what to do. They say, hey, like make sure that you aim correctly, make sure that, you respect the space and keep it hygienic. But, a lot of the times people either don't see it, forget about it, can't be bothered with it. And so what they did, so it wasn't working well. So what they did was they put this little fly. I know it's hard to see, but if you see that red circle in the black dot, it's actually the shape of a fly. And what they did was, it's kind of tapping on a bit of our human way of tasting fun. Yeah, men are aiming there because they want to aim at the fly. And this is a lot more effective in keeping the bathrooms clean than simply telling them what to do. The last one is the paradox of choice. And this, what it means is, so there was a study done where people, this set of experiment work that was done, they were selling gems. And when they gave people in one group, they gave people 24 choices, 24 different types of gems. And in another one, they gave them simply 6 types of gems. So you may think, oh, like the sales for the 24 gems must have been higher because you have more choices and therefore more people would, buy. You're wrong. There was only 3% sale and there's a lot more sale for the one with 6 jars of gems. Why? Because when humans are presented with way too many choices, you're like, oh, what's going on? Like, it's like too much effort just to process the information. And unless you are a gem fan or you really want to buy a great gem, but most people, they just can't be bothered, they have so many other things to do, and to buy a gem, why bother? Whereas if there's just simply 6 choices that are laid out, it's a lot more work to be done on the brain, and therefore more sales was done. So I see some questions. Yes. So yeah, to Anjana's comments, yeah, you could definitely use some of these examples and apply in your own work. So I just want to briefly mention that, the framework that my company uses, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is really this 1-hour crash course unconscious bias training is a beginning of a journey, right? Simply taking one unconscious bias training or reading few articles about it, it's not gonna debias yourself or remove the unconscious biases. And because it's so innate in us. And I hope that this is really just the beginning of your interest and more curiosity and learning more about this, everything that I've shared today. And also in real life, when we were to actually apply this at work setting, public policy, health economics, or the personal decision makings or organizational behavior, there are many steps that go into this. So firstly is obviously, what is the objective that you're trying to achieve? Secondly is, really conducting in-depth research, whether quantitatively or qualitatively, to identify what are the psychological barriers that prevent people from taking an action. Let's say having more women managers on the board. And then based on that finding, then you design your, what we call interventions or solutions, whether it's debiasing or nudging or whatever it may be, that remove or tap on unconscious biases to make this objective happen. And lastly, of course, it's always important to evaluate the effectiveness of the interventions or whatever solutions that you decide to implement so that you can make it better next time. So just perfect in time. That would be all from my side for today. So the simple answer to the question, how biased are you, is that we are all very biased. And what we could do about it is really firstly being aware of what they are and making conscious effort to debias ourselves or our organizations, and also using and leveraging the biases to create nudging techniques that would improve behavior for social good or behavior for the organization. So I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes if anyone has burning questions, or if not, you can always follow my company on the LinkedIn, our LinkedIn page. I would appreciate that. You can simply scan the QR code here, or you can feel free to drop me an email or reach out to me on LinkedIn to ask any questions or discuss anything further. So thank you, everyone. So I'll just stay a few more minutes in case anyone has questions.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. And yeah, I hope you walk away from today with a bit of self-reflection at your personal capacity and also work of organizations, and think about what are some of the decisions that you need to make and what are the judgments and biases that have or could influence them and how to make them better.